I'm Joseph Feinstein, and today on our completely unrehearsed, spontaneous teen talk, we're about to discuss one of those subjects that hasn't gone out of style since the days of Adam and Eve. It surrounds our life in ads, billboards, radio and TV commercials, and is a special favorite topic of teenagers. Of course, I'm talking about S-blank-X. America has been a puritanical country since its settlement hundreds of years ago. And as you know, the Puritans had strong convictions and attitudes regarding sex. It was not to be discussed publicly. It was designed as a means of procreation, not pleasure. It was certainly a no-no for the children to talk about and definitely not to be practiced until marriage, which, incidentally, occurred a lot sooner in those days than it does in the present time. But as they say in the ad, you've come a long way, baby, or have we? By the time most teens become 18, the Guttmacher Institute tells us more than 60% of all youngsters will have engaged in sex. Classes in sexuality are mandated or required in only 2 of our 50 states at this time. Geometry is mandated everywhere. For the past decade, over 1 million teens have gotten abortions each year. Ironically, we also know that when teens are informed about sex, sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancy, and abortion, they do tend to become more conservative, more conscientious, and much more responsible. What they do know about sex can help, not harm them. For the next half hour, let's take a look-see at how a group of teens reacted to the problem of sexual responsibility as we discuss this issue on today's Teen Talk. There's an old saying that goes, everyone talks about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, when it comes to teenagers and sex, there seems to be a lot of doing, but very little talking. Last year, 1.5 million teens in this country became pregnant, a rate higher than any other industrialized nation. What kind of generation are we raising that can't take responsibility for its own actions? I'm Joseph Feinstein, and today on Teen Talk, we've invited a panel of youngsters to share a problem that affects us all, the attitudes, feelings, and emotions related to our sexual responsibility. Welcome, panel. Welcome to Teen Talk. Tell me how and in what ways are you taking responsibility for your sexuality? David, why don't we start with you?
I'm personally a firm believer in, contraception, using contraception, and to be a little bit more picky about, who and what you're going to do what with. And that's basically it.
How old are you?
I'm 17.
17. And you've been dating since how old?
Since 15 about.
15. Have you gone out with a lot of girls?
Yeah, I guess a lot.
And have you gone steady at all with any of these girls?
Not for a very long period of time.
So each girl gets her own couple of weeks, or what?
Well, I mean, like I said, I'm pretty picky about who I'm going to go out with anyway.
I see.
So.
What constitutes an okay choice for you of the girl?
Just personality, really. I mean,
personality?
I like a lot. Just somebody who likes to have fun.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Holly, you like to have fun, I know. I mean, along with being serious at times. What do you do in terms of your own sexuality? How do you take care of this thing that we call sexuality?
Well, if I ever had that decision, I'd make sure I get on protection if I ever made a decision to have sex or any kind of attraction with that area.
Okay. And would you sit down and talk with mom? Would you sit down and talk with dad? Would you,
Yeah, I'm sure I would. And I'm sure I'd communicate with them about it, but I would have to make sure if it was that kind of a person I would want to share that with.
Have you in the past talked with dad, for instance, about some of the things about your personal life?
Not particularly, because there's a little of the distance there, but, I have shared about that, and it's, we've talked about it, and it doesn't seem, we've not really gotten much into it. In the past we have, but that's...
You've been going with a boy now for how long?
It's going to be a year.
Would you say that you loved him?
Yes, I would say that. Yeah.
And
I do care.
Yeah, and he love you?
Yes.
So there's a closeness. I'm
Yes.
wondering, what do you do with your feelings and emotions?
Well, I share about him and I talk to him about him, and it's more like a really close friendship. It's maybe a boyfriend and girlfriend, but it's really a real friendship as friends, and we talk about feelings and and emotions and stuff like that. But it's like real close friendship.
That's one of the nicest things that can develop between a boyfriend and a
Right.
girlfriend is not only the
attraction,
intimacy and the passion and all the rest of that stuff, which is generally, hopefully, there as a part of it, a concomitant, but also the warmth,
Right.
the friendship, the emotional liking.
Right.
How about you, Sergio? What do you do in that area? How old are you now?
17.
How long you been dating?
For about 3 years.
3 years. When I was 17, I would have been dating for about 3 weeks. Truly. And I went steady with my second girlfriend, the second girl I ever dated. She was very pretty, and she said yes in terms of going out, and she was very nice, and we went together for 2.5 years. You settle in very quickly when somebody just says yes, they'll go out with you. Yes, they'll be your friend. Okay. Have you known anyone for a long period of time?
Yeah, I was with someone for about 3 years. So she was actually my first love. Basically.
Your first love. Look at how his eyes are lighting up. Note how the eyes are lighting. You said, that's nice of you, Rachel. That's a good response.
Yeah. So it was first love, basically, and it was wonderful. She was a year older, though, and it didn't make much difference, but there was a lot of feeling, and there was a lot of emotional levels. Sometimes we would hate each other, sometimes we'd like each other, but most of the time we'd remain really good friends, and since we were so young, it went beyond the sexual aspects of the relationship. It was more of, well, I have a girlfriend, and it was a really wonderful experience to have
it is.
someone.
It's great to be able to say that to the guys, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm going out with Jody or Debbie or Karen
Who are
or
you
whatever.
going out with?
Yeah, who you going out with, right? And they always say nobody, and you say yeah, 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 yeah. All right. But where is this Juliet now?
She is at UC Berkeley.
She managed to get away from you, didn't
Yeah.
she?
So
Little devil. Oh, what can I tell you? Okay. They often say that boys use love to get sex and that girls use sex to get love. How do you respond to something like that? Take that one, Kim.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Boys use love to get sex. Girls use sex to get love.
I personally have never experienced anything like that, so I'm glad to say I don't really know how to.
Let the record show that Kimmy is really climbing the fence to stay on a fence for us. Rachel, you have any thoughts about that one? Have you found it that way?
I think the first part of that statement, holds some truth, and I'm sure the second part does too. I haven't come into contact with that, but there's always the lines that you always hear guys saying, well, if you love me you would, or I'll die if you don't, or it's one of those things. Well, if you really cared about a relationship, you'd make me happy too. And it's kind of the situation. I mean, I don't know. It's always the things, the stories that you hear about. Don't go out with that one, or
Last year, 1.5 million teenagers got pregnant. More than 12 million teens were afflicted with sexually transmitted diseases, and half of all the teenagers in the United States experience sexual intercourse. Panel, why do you think so many unmarried teens are engaging in sex? Lisa, let's welcome you to our panel, and why do you think so many teens are?
I'm really glad you asked me that question, because I don't think it's our fault at all, frankly. I think a lot of people would like to say, it's this generation and the kids are so wild now, but I think we got to throw it right back at the adults who are putting it all over the TV and all over the movies and all over the advertising, and it's all you ever see. And you read Cosmopolitan magazine on how to have multiple orgasms and all this stuff. And
it's an auto world. An automobile magazine has sex in there. And
oh yeah.
Right. Every magazine.
I mean, we're surrounded by it, so how could we possibly not be affected by all of that?
But I don't think it's just our generation. I think if you go through every generation, it's the adults who are saying, well, look at them, like they're coming up. in every generation, the newer generation is always like the wild ones, and coming up with new music or new feelings. And if you go back a generation, if you go back a decade into the 70s, you see how sex was completely used, and it was just one of those things. And so yeah, it was all very carefree, and it was like this sexual.
But there isn't really any place that doesn't have sexual connotations around somewhere.
Right.
Every
Right.
commercial, every billboard display, every ad in the newspapers, in one form or another. These centers, the sports centers and Sports Connection and places like that with the gorgeous models. Yeah, I know. Yeah, right, Sergio.
By the sense where when you see like an advertising, say for an automobile, say they're advertising a Porsche or something, well, they have this beautiful model modeling this Porsche, so you kind of go away from the Porsche and look at the model. So they're kind of selling the body and not the car. So, you have sex there. That's a connotation of sex.
That's right.
It's, here's my body.
It doesn't matter.
We should alter the media.
David?
I think that that sex among teens, if you guys know, it's built up to be such a huge thing, all through high school. Oh, are you a virgin? Duh. And it's like this big thing with it, and it's not as huge as people say it is. It can mean a lot if you do it the right way.
You were talking to me about abstinence before. That this is a philosophy of yours?
Yeah, I personally believe in being in abstinence, and just that's the best way to not get in trouble.
Well, you're right. You will not create a sexually transmitted disease that way. You will not get AIDS that way. You will not impregnate a woman that way. All of these things are true.
Also.
Is it working for you, though?
Very much so. Because I'm personally very afraid of getting someone pregnant, especially because I don't think that I will have the responsibility enough to be taking care of two other people.
So let's say your girlfriend wanted, you were going with this gal for a while, and she wanted to make love with you because she wanted to find out if you were going to be compatible. What do you say to her?
I'd say no.
Really?
Yeah. And I wouldn't care what people would say, I'd still say no.
And what do you do, Kim?
Well, I'd just like to comment on the question before. I think maybe part of the reason why we have a lot of these sexually transmitted diseases and all these unwanted pregnancies is partially because people aren't taking the time to think, what the consequence will be in the long run. They're just in the moment of, passion, and they're not thinking about what's going to happen later.
50% of all teenagers under the age of 18, 50 to 60% by the Alan Guttmacher Institute, by all of the figures that seem to come out, tell us that teenagers under 18 are having sex. Now that does leave 40 or 50% that are not having sex.
Or are
but that's
lying.
What's that?
Or are lying.
Or are lying, right. I like that, yeah. What's going on? Why are so many young people having sex? Yeah, David?
Like she said before, it's broadcasted constantly as the adults. And if they're going to put it on the TV, why don't they put it in schools too? And why don't we have a class that's going to teach us something about that before something goes wrong?
Do you need somebody to teach you something like that?
I don't, but I don't now. But when I was 13 years old, I didn't know all this stuff and what the older kids are telling you and do this with a girl and do that.
How old
know how
are
to
you now?
react yourself.
How old are you now?
I'm 17.
And in the 4 years, what have you learned?
I learned a lot, but I was just thinking back about how influential I was when I was that age, and I was ready to go anyway. And
let's say your boyfriend wants to marry you, and let's say you've decided that you have not made love with him, and he says to you he wants to find out if you guys are compatible in bed, along with all the other nice places where you go and visit and so forth. What do you do?
I don't think on a relationship sex is based on. I really personally believe it's the friendship and everything. If I didn't have any sexual thing and I wanted to marry him because of him and because of the kind of friendship we have, I would. But I don't think sex is based on a relationship. And today it's like that, where sex is based on a lot of the relationships, even in adult relationships, and even if it's in teens, but it's a lot to influence with the adults too, over 18. And today sex is like a weapon. That's what I hear the song, and it's by Pat Benatar. It says don't use sex as a weapon. And a lot of the times today, adults are using sex as a weapon.
Why do you think so many people are so uptight about the subject of sex? Kimmy?
Well, I think there are some people who agree with informing, younger kids about sex, and then there are some who disagree with it, and for reasons of they think that more kids will get involved in sex if you talk about it.
That's right, and we know just the opposite. It's just the opposite. The more kids know about sex, the more they're really versed in contraception, in the use of condoms, and the use of all about sexually transmitted diseases, the more they don't involve themselves in this stuff because they take precaution.
Well, also I believe that if a kid is gonna, if he's gonna be or she's gonna be involved in sex, at least let them be responsible about it and teach them ways of being responsible.
Exactly. Yeah, go ahead, Sergey.
I think it goes beyond the school teaching. I think it goes back to the family aspect.
Yeah.
Nothing the teacher will tell you, a teacher can't teach you basically how to have sex or what's the proper way. Well, they can teach you how to prevent anything happening, but it goes back to the parents and how the parents are going to influence sex on you and how they're going to teach you.
Parents don't, and I think that the reason
That's
why
the
students who do know about sex don't have it, or choose not to, or choose to remain abstain, is because a lot of it's the younger kids, the people who are in junior high school, who start having sex, and the health courses in junior high are very selective about what they'll teach. When you get to high school and you learn all about it, and if they haven't had sex yet, then they might stop. But I think the key is to get in the junior highs.
My first experience was as a junior high school student when I was in 7th grade, and I came home. I heard some nasty words used on the gym lot, and the guys were talking. The 9th graders were cursing and stuff. And I came home with some of these words, and I said to my dad, "What did these words mean?" And he said, "If I ever hear you say that again, I'll wash your mouth out with soap." They all had a thing with soap in those days. I don't know why. Soap clearance, And I realized very quickly that was the end of me talking about sex to my father, because there was never going to be a time when he was so uptight about it and he was so closed about it that he couldn't do anything. Lisa, who did you talk to?
Well, I had a very similar experience to yours. I think when I was about, 8 or 9 years old, I came home and asked my mother, what are the facts of life, just like that, and she said, go practice the piano. And when I had a boyfriend when I was in high school, I asked my mom about contraception, and she said, say no.
Just say
and that
no.
was all I ever got. And I think my biggest way of taking responsibility was fear. Because I was terrified, and I really wanted to with my boyfriend, but I was absolutely terrified that, he rented a hotel room and everything, and we were going to go off and have a wonderful weekend on Miami Beach, and I just thought the sky was going to crack open and my mother was going to appear.
Not Henny Penny, huh? Not Chicken Little.
I was terrified.
It was Mother.
It was me, my grandma's there.
So sometimes you got to give the kids just a little bit too much. But Chicken Little was not falling out of the sky. Your mother was. Mrs. Shapiro was falling down and making all these noises.
And as a result, I didn't know anything. I couldn't talk to her about it, and
well, let me ask you, what will you say to your children that you wish your parents had said to you, David?
Just tell them that I'm behind them whatever they choose, pretty much, and I'd like to teach them, not just just tell them something once, and then I'd like to every year, at least go into it and ask them about their sexual experiences.
That's right. It is.
Find out what's going on.
Every year there is more to add to the story.
Yeah.
Every year there's a little bit more nuance to give them, because a 12-year-old doesn't need the same kind of story that a 15 or 16-year-old. Bradley, my son, came in to visit last week, and he's 21 now, and we went off on a Saturday for lunch together, and he was telling me some of his exploits out in Albuquerque, and stuff like that. And I was listening to him and kind of thinking about, the kid has really grown up, and he's really changed a lot. But the nicest part about Bradley is that he really has a great deal of sensitivity. He is not exploiting women. He's not using a girl for sexual purposes kind of thing. And that made me very happy to know that all of his relationships are mutual relationships. their friendship relationships and that kind of thing. All right, I want you to finish this sentence, and I have given you no clues about this, so just react in whatever way. If you want to have a good love life, Rachel, if you want to have a good love life,
Have it with someone you love.
have it with someone you love. If you want to have a good love life, Lisa,
You need to learn how to love.
you need to learn how to love. If you want to have a good love life, Holly,
I'd say a safe one, and you gotta make sure if I love the person.
okay. And if you want to have a good love life, Kimmy,
Be sure it's with someone you care about.
and David, if you want to have a good love life.
You have to know what love is.
All relationships, sexual and otherwise, hinge on several things: communication, love, caring, and commitment. But responsibility can also play a larger role. Sex education appears to help young people tackle this responsibility better. But sex education without values, by definition, is valueless. Our media can serve us in so many positive ways in helping to encourage sexual responsibility. But when the ratings race forces the sensational over the sane and intimacy over that best left to the imagination, I can only say we can all do better. 5-year-old Johnny comes into his family. Mom and Dad are sitting around, and he turns to them and he says, "Where do I come from?" And the both parents look at each other rather quizzically and a little puzzled, and Mom says, "Okay, I think it's time that Johnny's ready to hear the message, and I assume he's of age." So she starts talking about the birds and the bees, and she starts talking about sperms and eggs and fertilization and where babies grow and 9 months and all of that kind of thing. And finally he looks at her and Dad, and he says, no, I didn't mean that. I mean, you know, Billy down the street comes from Cincinnati. Where do I come from? Well, assuming, as you can see, just doesn't work. It never answers the nitty-gritty, tough questions that need to be answered. The facts do tell us that when youngsters are in the know, when they're told things gently, sensitively, and factually, they have the chance to do something about them. With respect to sexual responsibility, there's no doubt in my mind that as we expand our information base, as we extend our awareness, and as we promote healthy values and choices in the home, at school, at work, and in the marketplace, we will see more youngsters behaving along safer, caring paths. It's when we attempt to point fingers or withhold information or pretend a problem doesn't exist that causes difficulties to really ensue. There are books to help you parents and teens. One of my favorite is Raising Each Other by Jean Brondino and her panel of teen writers. What Jean did as a school teacher was to involve 6 or 7 of her students to write with her about the problems of teenagers, teenage sex, schooling, relationships, from the point of view of the teenagers themselves. And this book has so much valuable information for both parents and teenagers alike. You can get a copy of the book from the Hunter House Publishers. They're at 2200 Central Avenue, Suite 202, Alameda, California, 94501. Or if you want a speedy response, you can call them at 415-865-5282. The total cost of the book is $12. For Teen Talk, this is Joseph Feinstein saying we'll see you very soon.